Hello everyone, and welcome to Chirp Splat Guides, a rundown on weapons in both turf war and anarchy battles. We're going over the Sloshers today, a pretty interesting weapon type that is unique to Splatoon. I can't even think of something a little similar in a different shooter. Before we get started, I do have to say there's a reason I saved this weapon type until last. They're a weapon I've never mained or considered maining. That's not to say I can't play them, but this won't have as much deep strategy as some other videos. With that out of the way, let's actually get started with the standard Slosher. As you can see, it has a unique projectile that falls in a solid arc. This weapon has a fairly long range, but gets outdone covering turf due to the slow firing speed. It does, however, create a solid straight line of ink very quickly, which is good for approaching or retreating. Let's talk about that unique projectile. It has a few interesting properties. First, it damages everything in between the landing point and your cephalopod. This line has two hitboxes, one that does 70 damage and another that does 50. The interesting thing about this projectile is that as long as your opponent isn't lower than you, the damage will be 100% consistent. This allows sloshers to attack over the top of cover and onto ledges. The downsides? Your splat time is incredibly slow. Your second slosh takes half a second to come out, giving the target ample time to reposition after getting hit once. When attacking someone below you, the damage does have drop-off, increasing your splat time quite a bit, to 3 or even 4 hits. Its loadout includes the Splat Bomb, a good staple lethal bomb. I've seen others have good success hitting with the splash of the Splat Bomb, then finishing off with a slosh or vice versa. The Ink Strike isn't great, to be honest. It doesn't charge very fast, is easily avoided, and doesn't cover all that much ground. It forces the opponents off the objective for a little bit, which is handy at least. For your build, you want to go with a typical Slayer loadout. You can choose Comeback or Last Ditch Effort. Comeback is the best if you're confident you can jump right back into the fray and get consistent splats until, well, you get splatted again. Last Ditch Effort, meanwhile, helps make a comeback once your opponent has pushed the objective close. As a note, if you mostly play Turf War, Last Ditch Effort is the clear winner here. Stealth Jump is a necessity. Ink Resistance, Quick Super Jump, and Special Saver are good ones to make a small investment in. Quick Respawn is good to have a bit extra of. The rest you can just toss around what you like. Ink Savers, Ink Refill, Movement Speed, abilities, etc. As usual, this is a starting point. All the abilities on the head and shirt can be shuffled to whatever you want. Swapping the Special Saver for Ink Resist would not be a bad plan either. Okay, so, gameplay. In Turf War, I honestly don't have a great strategy for you. Like many Slayers, you're wanting to focus on splatting opponents. You should not be the one focusing on inking dead areas. A proper coverage weapon will get quadruple the ground you do in the same time. Get to the center ASAP at the beginning of the match and start splatting anyone you can. You're surprisingly mobile, so feel free to hunt folks down and make sure to learn when to retreat. In ranked, well, this plan doesn't change all that much, to be honest. You excel at harassing folks on ledges, but blindly aiming is very much a learned skill. It's quite difficult to make the follow-up shot to splat if your opponent has good reaction time. You're basically gambling on whether your opponent strafes, backs up, or stands still. So what I tend to do is throw a glob, throw a second where I think they'll run, and if it missed, I'll back up to see if they're visible or fully retreated. Remember, you can attack folks hiding behind cover, but you'll have to make educated guesses on where they're sitting exactly behind that cover. Due to the damage fall-off, you might think initially sitting on a ledge yourself is always a bad idea. This is not necessarily true. The reason for that damage fall-off is just because a two-hitting projectile falling from above where you can't shoot back would be OP as can be, especially if you take marking into account. If you need to play safe, hiding on an edge and throwing globs over isn't a bad plan. Something to keep in mind, the lowest damage from throwing off a ledge plus a full-on hit will splat an enemy. Also, I normally don't mention team makeup, but if you have a friend who can mark enemies for you, the Slosher becomes incredibly strong. Let's move right along to the Tri-slosher. This is a fantastic beginner's weapon. The gimmick here is that it has a shorter range and lower damage, but quicker attack speed, and the projectile launches in a cone. Basically, it's the default Slosher without requiring all that pesky aiming. It splats in 2 hits when on even or lower ground from your opponent. Due to the shorter range, it might be a good idea to include Ninja Squid in that build before. So let's look at some gameplay. The Tri-slosher has similar playstyle to the normal Slosher. You can harass folks on ledges or behind cover. The upside being it's easier to hit blind firing. The downside being you can't lob as far over the ledge or cover. Your sub and special at first glance seem not great, but I find great success using the toxic mist on the backline nest, forcing them to retreat and giving me an opportunity to approach them. In fact, harassing the enemy backline is where I find the most success with the Tri-slosher in general. The inkjet can be used to finish off stragglers and continue pushing your advantage. The Tri-slosher can be quite good at sharking thanks to its quick splat time. Also, when fighting a group, make sure to aim high so the glob will hit more enemies. Otherwise, this weapon's pretty straightforward and strong. Next up, we have the Sloshing machine. This is a high-skill Slosher, and the one I am the worst with. The projectile is very different from other Sloshers. It launches a large glob of ink in an arc, flying with ink swirling around it. The indirect spray does 40-ish damage, while a direct hit does 76. On impact, it does decent splash damage to nearby enemies. Now, not to throw shade, but Sheldon claims this weapon has good ink coverage for some reason. Do note that is very wrong. In fact, it has the worst coverage of the Sloshers without any competition. It has the Fizzy Bomb sub, which I haven't found much use for. It causes a bit of chaos, but usually I find your normal slosh attack is just better. Maybe someone can give advice on it in the comments? You do make up for the sub with the Booyah Bomb, which is very strong. It's basically a "this objective is mine now" card. I don't have much gameplay for you here. You play with this one similar to a blaster though. You want to aim directly at who you want to hit, but where if you miss, the splash damage will hit your target. Spacing is pretty big here. You can harass folks on the ledge or behind cover even better than other Sloshers, and your damage doesn't fall off quite as much when shooting enemies lower than you compared to the other Sloshers. I do wish we had a bit more to tell you, but I honestly really don't. We finish with the Bloblobber. This weapon is crazy ridiculous and unique. It's a ton of fun. It launches 4 bubbles that bounce off of the ground and terrain, doing 30 damage each with no damage decay. It has quite a long range and good ink coverage. Something to note, the range lowers every time the ball bounces off of anything. So flinging it at a wall in a thin corridor won't be as strong as you'd expect. This also means if you lob them from up high, they'll go further as well. They also have momentum of sorts, so throwing them up onto a ledge will cause them to not travel as far, basically giving it the opposite weakness of other sloshers, where it excels at shooting opponents below. Your build should be dramatically different, since this is the first non-slayer slosher. Last Ditch Effort is a clear winner, with Ink Saver main, since you'll be lobbing a lot. This is a rare weapon where thermal ink is useful, since you'll be accidentally hitting faraway enemies without splatting them quite often. Special Speed Up is also strong to get you more rain clouds. Let's look at some gameplay. As the Bloblobber, you are a zone control backline. Your zone of influence is incredibly large and you want to abuse that. Pick a spot you want your team to take ownership of and fill it with all the bubbles. You don't care about splatting, you want to do poke damage and cover ground. When an enemy dares not respect your area, lob in their general direction until they leave your zone or get splatted. You usually want to spread your shots out a bit so they're harder to avoid, doing a sort of sweeping motion. You have a lot of range, so sit back. You're very vulnerable to mobile slayers. Throw your Ink Storm out anytime you get it. Place your Sprinkler in hard to hit areas with high value during downtime when your team has a good numbers advantage. Honestly, that about covers it and finishes off this video. We've only got the chargers left for weapon class guides. I've got some other content in the pipes though, so look forward to that. We're super close to 1K subs. So if you want to see more of me, please hit that subscribe button. And drop a like if you liked it. And if you have any corrections or additional tips, leave them in the comments below. Until next time, stay fresh.